Lady Victoria had 24 hours to decide: marry Duke Harrison, or watch her younger sister's reputation be destroyed by scandal. She chose sacrifice, walking down the aisle to save her family's honour. But when she discovered that Harrison had orchestrated the entire crisis just to make her his wife, she realised she had married a man whose obsession with her ran deeper than she ever imagined. The letter that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a messenger who vanished before Victoria could question him. The wax seal bore the Duke of Westmere's coat of arms, and inside Harrison's precise handwriting laid out terms that made her blood run cold. He had compromising letters between her sister Eleanor and a married man, photographs that would destroy Eleanor's chances of marriage, and witnesses who would swear to seeing them in compromising positions. 24 hours, Lady Victoria, the letter concluded. Marry me, or watch your sister become a social pariah. The choice is yours. Victoria's hands trembled as she read the demands again. Eleanor was only 18, naive and romantic, easily swept away by the attentions of Lord Pemberton, a married man with a reputation for seducing young women. If Harrison's evidence became public, Eleanor would be ruined beyond redemption. No respectable family would receive her, no decent man would marry her, and their own family's standing would crumble alongside Eleanor's reputation. But why Harrison? Victoria had barely spoken to the Duke beyond polite society conversations. He was wealthy, titled, and handsome, in a severe way that made other women flutter their fans and whisper behind gloved hands. Yet he had shown no particular interest in her during the 2 seasons she had been out in society. His sudden demand for marriage made no sense unless it was purely practical. Perhaps he needed a wife to secure an inheritance or fulfill some family obligation. Eleanor found Victoria in the morning room, staring at the letter with unseeing eyes. At 18, Eleanor possessed the kind of natural beauty that made men lose their composure, and women feel suddenly plain by comparison. Her golden hair caught sunlight like spun silk, and her blue eyes held an innocence that Victoria feared would be forever tarnished by this scandal. "Victoria, you look dreadful. Is it news from father?" Their father was away on business, leaving Victoria as head of the household in his absence. At 23, Victoria had managed their estate, and Eleanor's social debut with quiet efficiency, earning a reputation for competence that overshadowed her own considerable beauty. Where Eleanor was golden sunlight, Victoria was autumn fire, auburn hair, intelligent dark eyes, and a composure that made men respect her rather than court her. "Eleanor, I need you to tell me the truth about Lord Pemberton." The colour drained from Eleanor's face, confirming Victoria's worst fears. Who told you?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is how compromised you are. Have you been alone with him? Have you allowed him liberties that society would consider improper?" Eleanor collapsed into a chair, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He said he loved me. He said his marriage was arranged and loveless, that he was seeking divorce through Parliament. I believed him, Victoria. I believed every word." "How far did this go?" "He kissed me." "More than once. And there were letters, so many letters where I wrote things a lady should never write to a man." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "There was a photographer at the park last week when we met. I thought it strange, but Lord Pemberton said it was probably some society journal documenting fashion. Oh God, Victoria, what have I done?" Victoria's heart sank as she realised Harrison's evidence was likely genuine. Eleanor had been thoroughly compromised, and in ways that would destroy her reputation completely if made public. The letters alone would be damning, but photographs and witnesses would make the scandal absolutely devastating. "Eleanor, listen to me carefully. You're never to see Lord Pemberton again. If he contacts you, you will not respond. If you encounter him in public, you will cut him completely. Do you understand?" "But Victoria, I love him. He is a married man who has ruined you for his own amusement. Whatever you felt for him must end now, before this scandal destroys our entire family." Eleanor's tears flowed harder, but she nodded her understanding. Victoria wished she could offer comfort, but there was no time for gentleness. She had less than 24 hours to decide whether to sacrifice herself to save Eleanor, and she already knew what her choice would be. That evening, Victoria sat in her father's study, composing her response to Duke Harrison. Her handwriting was steady despite the turmoil in her mind, as she accepted his proposal with as much dignity as she could muster. She would marry him to protect Eleanor, but she would not pretend to be grateful for the arrangement. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in a private ceremony that satisfied legal requirements without creating the social spectacle Victoria desperately wanted to avoid. Harrison had handled all the arrangements with efficient discretion, ensuring that society viewed their union as a sudden but respectable match rather than the coercive arrangement it truly was. Victoria wore her mother's ivory silk gown, altered to fit her taller frame. The pearls at her throat felt like a noose as she walked down the aisle of the small chapel on Harrison's estate. He waited at the altar in formal black, his dark hair perfectly styled, his grey eyes unreadable as they met hers. At 31, Harrison possessed the kind of aristocratic bearing that commanded respect and suggested depth that few people were privileged to see. When the vicar asked if she took Harrison as her husband, Victoria's voice remained steady despite the rebellion in her heart. "I do." Harrison's response was equally controlled, but Victoria thought she detected something warmer in his voice when he pledged himself to her. Perhaps it was wishful thinking, but for a moment she wondered if this marriage might become something more than a business arrangement. The wedding breakfast was attended only by Eleanor, Harrison's younger brother Charles, and a handful of family friends who had been sworn to discretion. Eleanor looked radiant but subdued, clearly grateful for Victoria's sacrifice while struggling with guilt over the necessity of it. Charles, who bore a strong resemblance to Harrison but with a more open, cheerful demeanour, seemed genuinely pleased by the match and went out of his way to make Victoria feel welcomed into the family. "My brother is fortunate to have secured such a bride," Charles said quietly when Harrison was occupied with other guests. "I hope you will both find happiness together." Victoria wondered what Charles would think if he knew the true circumstances of their marriage, but she simply smiled and thanked him for his kindness. The first month of marriage passed in careful politeness between Victoria and Harrison. They lived in his London townhouse during the social season, maintaining separate bedrooms and separate schedules that allowed them to coexist without developing intimacy. Harrison was unfailingly courteous, ensuring Victoria had everything she needed while respecting the emotional distance she maintained. Victoria had expected coldness or indifference from a man who had essentially blackmailed her into marriage, but Harrison's behaviour puzzled her. He seemed genuinely concerned for her comfort, remembering preferences she had mentioned only once, and ensuring that her favourite flowers filled the house each week. When she expressed interest in redecorating the morning room, he gave her complete authority over the project and praised her choices enthusiastically. More puzzling still were the small attentions that suggested Harrison had been observing her long before their forced marriage. He stocked the library with books by her favourite authors, ordered tea blends he somehow knew she preferred, and arranged social engagements with people she enjoyed while avoiding those she found tedious. Either Harrison was remarkably observant and considerate, or he had been paying attention to her preferences for far longer than their brief courtship would suggest. The revelation came 6 weeks after their wedding, during a dinner party Harrison hosted for his political associates. Victoria had been circulating among the guests, playing the role of gracious hostess, when she overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. "Brilliant strategy, Harrison," Lord Ashford was saying, "creating that entire scandal to force Lady Victoria's hand. Though I must say, 3 years of planning seems excessive even for you." "Some prizes are worth extraordinary effort," Harrison replied quietly. "Besides, the scandal served multiple purposes. It removed Pemberton from society. The man was a predator who needed to be stopped, and it gave me the opportunity I had been waiting for." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face as the full scope of Harrison's deception became clear. He had not simply taken advantage of Eleanor's indiscretion, he had orchestrated the entire situation. The mysterious photographer, the witnesses, even Lord Pemberton's sudden interest in Eleanor, all of it had been arranged by Harrison to create the scandal that would force Victoria into marriage. She retreated to the ladies' retiring room, her mind reeling with implications. Harrison had spent 3 years planning their marriage, which meant he had been watching her, studying her, manipulating circumstances around her without her knowledge. The man she'd married was not just calculating, he was obsessed with her to a degree that was both flattering and terrifying. When the guests departed and the house grew quiet, Victoria found Harrison in his study, reading correspondence by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, and something in her expression made him set aside his papers immediately. "You heard the conversation with Ashford." It was not a question, and Victoria appreciated that he did not insult her intelligence by denying what she had discovered. 3 years, Harrison? You have been planning this for 3 years?" "Yes." "Why?" The question emerged as barely more than a whisper, but Harrison heard it clearly. He rose from his desk and moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames as he chose his words carefully. "Because I have been in love with you for 3 years, and every conventional attempt to court you failed." Victoria stared at him, certain she had misheard. In love with me? Desperately, completely, to a degree that concerned my family and friends, who watched me refuse every other potential bride while waiting for some opportunity to make you notice me as more than a polite acquaintance. You could have simply asked to court me properly. Harrison turned to face her, and Victoria saw something vulnerable in his expression that she had never glimpsed before. "I tried. I called on you 6 times during your first season. You received me politely, conversed about literature and politics, and showed absolutely no interest in me as anything other than an intellectual equal. When I attempted to move our conversations toward more personal topics, you redirected them with such skill that I began to suspect you were deliberately avoiding any emotional intimacy." Victoria remembered those visits, though she had not realized they were attempts at courtship. Harrison had been unfailingly proper, discussing books and current events with an intelligence that she found stimulating but hardly romantic. She had enjoyed their conversations but never suspected he harbored deeper feelings. "So you decided to blackmail me instead." "I decided to create circumstances that would allow me to prove my worth as a husband before you had the opportunity to reject me." Harrison moved closer, his eyes intense with suppressed emotion. "I knew that if I could convince you to marry me, even under duress, I could eventually earn your affection through my actions rather than my words. By manipulating my sister? By threatening to destroy an innocent girl's reputation? Eleanor was never truly in danger. Lord Pemberton was already under investigation for his treatment of young women. I simply ensured that Eleanor's involvement would be seen as victimization rather than willing participation. The scandal would have reflected poorly on him, not her, and I had plans to ensure she emerged with her reputation intact." Victoria struggled to process this information. "You mean—" "Eleanor was never going to be ruined. The photographs and letters would have been destroyed without publication, and Pemberton would have been quietly exiled from society for his predatory behaviour. Your sister's reputation was always safe. I simply needed you to believe otherwise long enough to accept my proposal." "You let me sacrifice myself for nothing?" "You sacrificed yourself for love. Love of your sister, which is one of the qualities that made me love you. I simply arranged circumstances so that your sacrifice would also secure your own happiness, though I realize you do not see it that way yet." Victoria sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of Harrison's manipulation. "How can you call it love when it was built on deception? Because every day since our marriage, I've tried to show you the man I truly am, not the circumstances that brought us together. Have I been unkind to you, Victoria? Have I made demands or shown you disrespect?" Victoria had to admit that Harrison had been nothing but considerate since their wedding. He had given her space to adjust to their marriage, while ensuring her every comfort was met. He had integrated her smoothly into his social circle, supported her interests, and treated her with a respect that many wives never receive from their husbands. "You have been considerate. Because I love you. Because I want you to be happy, even if that happiness never includes returning my feelings. The marriage may have been arranged through deception, but my care for you is absolutely genuine." Victoria studied Harrison's face, searching for signs of continued manipulation, but finding only sincerity and a vulnerability that surprised her. "You really have loved me for 3 years. Since the evening we first spoke at Lady Pemberton's ball, you were discussing the reform bills with Lord Ashford, and your passion for social justice was so evident that I found myself completely captivated. I went home that night knowing I had met the woman I wanted to marry, and I have spent every day since then trying to find a way to make that happen." The memory surfaced clearly in Victoria's mind, a conversation about workers' rights and education reform that had grown heated as she defended positions that many in society found too radical for a lady to hold. She remembered Harrison listening intently but had assumed his attention was polite rather than personal. "I thought you were just being courteous." "I was being enchanted. You spoke with such intelligence and conviction that I knew immediately you were unlike any woman I had ever met. When you challenged Lord Ashford's assumptions about the poor deserving their circumstances, I fell in love with your fierce compassion as much as your beauty." Victoria felt her anger beginning to soften despite her determination to maintain it. Harrison's deception had been elaborate and manipulative, but his motivations were more complex than simple coercion. He had been driven by love, however misguided his methods. "Harrison, what you did was wrong. You manipulated my family, threatened my sister, and coerced me into marriage. Regardless of your feelings, those actions caused real pain and fear. You're absolutely right, and I will regret causing you and Eleanor distress for the rest of my life. I can only ask that you judge me not just by how our marriage began, but by how I conduct myself as your husband going forward." Victoria stood and moved to the window, looking out at the garden where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom. Harrison's revelation changed everything about their relationship, but she was not sure whether it made their situation better or worse. He loved her, but he had also deceived her so thoroughly that she questioned whether she could ever trust him completely. "I need time to think about this." "Of course. Take all the time you need. I will not pressure you for a response or expect anything to change between us immediately." Victoria turned back to face him. "Will you promise me something?" "Anything. No more deceptions, no more manipulations. If we are to have any hope of building a real marriage, it must be based on honesty, regardless of how difficult that honesty might be. I promise you complete honesty from this moment forward." Victoria nodded and left the study, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. Harrison loved her, had loved her for years, but he had also manipulated her family and coerced her into marriage. She was angry about his deception, but she could not deny that he had been nothing but kind to her since their wedding. The question was whether love built on manipulation could ever become something genuine and lasting. Over the following weeks, Victoria found herself observing Harrison with new eyes, looking for evidence of the feelings he claimed to have harboured for so long. What she discovered surprised her. His attention to her preferences was not the result of careful observation during their marriage, but of years spent quietly learning what pleased her. He knew she preferred Darjeeling tea in the morning and Earl Grey in the afternoon because he had been present at dozens of social gatherings where she had made these choices. He had filled their library with her favourite authors because he had listened when she recommended books to other people at parties and literary salons. Most revealing was a conversation Victoria overheard between Harrison and his brother Charles. She had been returning from the garden when their voices carried through the open window of Harrison's study. "You could court her properly now," Charles was saying. "She is your wife. Surely you have the right to pursue a genuine relationship." "I forfeited that right when I deceived her into marriage," Harrison replied. "Victoria married me under duress, believing she was saving her sister. Until she chooses to see me as more than the man who manipulated her family, I have no right to expect her affection." "But you love her, which is precisely why I must give her the freedom to decide whether our marriage can become something real. If I pressure her now, I am no better than the coercive man who forced her to the altar." Victoria felt something shift in her chest as she heard the pain in Harrison's voice. He was not pressuring her for affection or demanding his marital rights, despite having every legal authority to do so. Instead, he was giving her space to heal from his deception and decide whether she could ever care for him genuinely. That evening, Victoria found herself studying Harrison across the dinner table as he discussed his plans to improve conditions for the workers on his estate. His passion for social reform matched her own, and she realized that their early conversations had failed to develop into courtship, not because he lacked interest, but because she had been too focused on intellectual discussion to notice his personal attention. "Harrison, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "During my first season, when you called on me, were you truly attempting courtship, or were you simply being polite?" Harrison set down his fork and considered his answer carefully. "I was attempting courtship, but I was also genuinely interested in your thoughts on the topics we discussed. I hoped that intellectual compatibility might lead to personal affection, but I was too inexperienced in courtship to know how to transition from conversation to romance. What would you have done differently if you'd known how?" "I would have complimented your appearance as well as your mind. I would have brought you flowers instead of books. I would have asked about your feelings and preferences instead of only your opinions. I would have tried to make you see me as a man who desired you, not just one who respected your intelligence." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks at the idea of Harrison desiring her. She had been so focused on his deception that she had not considered the physical aspects of their marriage. But now she found herself wondering what it would be like to be truly wanted by a man of Harrison's intelligence and intensity. "Would you like the opportunity to try again?" Harrison's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you saying—" I am saying that perhaps we could attempt to build a real courtship within our marriage. We are bound together regardless. We might as well discover whether we can find genuine happiness in that bond. Victoria, are you certain? I do not want you to feel obligated. I am not making this offer out of obligation. I am making it because I have seen how you treat me when you believe yourself unobserved, and the man you are when you think no one is watching is someone I could learn to care for deeply. Harrison's face lit with an expression of such pure joy that Victoria felt her heart skip in response. Then yes, I would very much like the opportunity to court my wife properly. Their second courtship was unlike anything Victoria had experienced before. Harrison brought her flowers each morning, but chose varieties that matched her dresses rather than following conventional preferences. He complimented her appearance, but in ways that showed he truly saw her, praising the way sunlight caught in her hair when she read by the window, or how her eyes brightened when she discussed books she loved. More importantly, Harrison asked about her feelings and fears, her dreams and disappointments. He wanted to know what made her laugh, what caused her pain, what she hoped to accomplish in life beyond marriage and motherhood. Victoria found herself sharing thoughts and emotions she had never discussed with anyone, feeling safe in the knowledge that Harrison valued her mind as much as her beauty. Physical intimacy developed slowly but naturally. Harrison would take her hand when they walked in the garden, or place his palm against the small of her back when guiding her through doorways. Each touch was gentle and brief, giving Victoria the opportunity to retreat if she felt uncomfortable, but also demonstrating his desire for her with a restraint that made her trust him more completely. Their first real kiss happened 6 weeks into their renewed courtship, during an evening when they had been discussing poetry by the fireplace in the library. Harrison had been reading aloud from Byron, his deep voice bringing new meaning to familiar verses, when Victoria realized she was watching his mouth more than listening to his words. Harrison. He looked up from the book, and whatever he saw in her expression made him set it aside immediately. Yes? I would like you to kiss me. Are you certain? I am certain that I want to find out what it feels like to be kissed by my husband when I actually want him to do it. Harrison stood and moved to her chair, offering his hand to help her rise. When she was standing before him, he cupped her face gently in his palms, studying her expression to ensure she was truly willing. Victoria, I need you to know that whatever happens between us tonight or in the future, my feelings for you are not dependent on your physical acceptance of me. I love you for your mind, your character, your fierce loyalty to your family. Everything else is a gift I hope to earn, not a debt I expect you to pay. The kiss, when it finally came, was everything Victoria had hoped it would be. Harrison's lips were warm and firm against hers, moving with a gentleness that gradually deepened into passion as she responded. She felt his restraint in the tremor of his hands against her face, the way he held back even as she pressed closer to him. When they separated, both were breathing unsteadily. Victoria looked up into Harrison's eyes and saw desire tempered by patience, passion controlled by love. I think I am beginning to understand why you waited 3 years for me, she said softly. And I think I am beginning to believe that the wait was worthwhile. Their relationship continued to develop over the following months, with Victoria discovering new reasons to care for Harrison almost daily. He supported her charitable work with enthusiasm and financial backing, understanding that her desire to help others was not a passing fancy, but a fundamental part of her character. When she expressed interest in women's education reform, he introduced her to political figures who could advance her causes and offered his own influence to support her efforts. Most importantly, Harrison never made Victoria feel that she owed him anything because of their marriage circumstances. He courted her as if she were free to reject him, treating her acceptance as a gift rather than a foregone conclusion. This freedom to choose made Victoria's growing feelings feel genuine rather than coerced. The moment Victoria realized she truly loved Harrison came during a crisis that tested both their relationship and their individual characters. Eleanor, who had been quietly engaged to a respectable young man since the previous season, was approached by Lord Pemberton with threats to reveal their past association, unless she paid him a substantial sum. Eleanor came to Victoria in tears, terrified that her past indiscretion would destroy her engagement and her future happiness. Victoria immediately brought the situation to Harrison, trusting him to help find a solution despite her lingering sensitivity about his manipulation of Eleanor's previous scandal. Harrison's response revealed the depth of his character and his growth since their marriage began. Instead of handling the situation through manipulation or coercion, he approached it with complete transparency. He involved Victoria in every decision, explained each step of his plan, and ensured that Eleanor understood exactly what was happening and why. Together they gathered evidence of Pemberton's attempts to blackmail multiple young women, building a case that would remove him from society permanently without requiring Eleanor to testify publicly. Harrison used his political connections to ensure Pemberton faced legal consequences for his actions, while Victoria worked with the other victims to provide them with support and protection. Throughout the crisis, Harrison never once suggested that Eleanor's situation was her fault, or that she deserved the consequences of her indiscretion. Instead, he treated her with the same protective care he showed Victoria, understanding that Eleanor was Victoria's family and therefore his responsibility as well. When Pemberton was finally arrested and exiled from England, Eleanor was free to marry her fiancé without fear of exposure. At Eleanor's wedding, Victoria watched Harrison dance with her sister and realised that she no longer saw him as the man who had manipulated her family. Instead, she saw him as the man who had protected her family when they needed him most. That night, Victoria went to Harrison's bedroom for the first time since their marriage. She found him reading by the fireplace, still dressed in his formal evening clothes from the wedding celebration. He looked up in surprise when she entered without knocking. "Victoria, is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect." She moved to where he sat and took the book from his hands, setting it aside before settling onto his lap. "I love you, Harrison." His arms came around her immediately, holding her close as if she might disappear if he loosened his grip. "Are you certain?" "I am certain that you are the most honourable man I have ever known, despite the dishonourable way our marriage began. I am certain that you love me in a way that makes me feel cherished rather than possessed. And I am certain that I want to be your wife in every sense, not because I have to, but because I choose to." Their wedding night, delayed by months of careful courtship and gradual trust building, was everything Victoria had hoped it would be. Harrison loved her with the same patience and attention he had shown during their courtship, ensuring her comfort and pleasure above his own satisfaction. Victoria felt truly married for the first time, bound to Harrison not by obligation or manipulation, but by choice and mutual love. In the months that followed, their marriage became the kind of partnership Victoria had always dreamed of but never expected to achieve. Harrison valued her opinions and included her in his business and political decisions, while Victoria provided the emotional support and intellectual companionship that Harrison had craved for so long. They worked together on social reform projects, combining Harrison's political influence with Victoria's passion for justice to achieve meaningful change in their community. Their home became a gathering place for like-minded individuals who shared their commitment to improving conditions for the less fortunate. Eleanor's happiness in her own marriage provided Victoria with additional satisfaction, knowing that her sister had found love without scandal or compromise. The relationship between the sisters remained strong, with Eleanor often crediting Victoria's sacrifice with making her own happiness possible. 2 years after their forced marriage began, Victoria and Harrison celebrated their second wedding anniversary, with a renewal of vows that reflected their true feelings rather than their original circumstances. Standing in the same chapel where they had first married, Victoria spoke vows that came from her heart rather than her sense of duty. "I choose you, Harrison, not because I have to, but because you have proven yourself worthy of love through your actions, your character, and your unwavering devotion to my happiness above your own." Harrison's response brought tears to Victoria's eyes. "I choose you, Victoria, as I have chosen you every day since I first met you. Thank you for seeing past my mistakes to the man I wanted to become for you." Their love story was unconventional, built on deception that transformed into devotion, manipulation that became genuine partnership. Victoria never forgot how their marriage began, but she also never regretted how it developed. Harrison had been wrong to force their union through blackmail, but he had been right about their compatibility and his ability to earn her love through patience and respect. Years later, when their own children asked how their parents had met, Victoria and Harrison would exchange a look that held all the complexity of their history. They would tell their children about a marriage that began with necessity but flourished through choice, about love that conquered deception through honesty and commitment. Their story became a testament to the possibility of redemption and growth within marriage, proof that even relationships built on shaky foundations could become strong and lasting through dedication, respect, and genuine care for each other's happiness. In the end, Victoria realised that Harrison's greatest gift to her was not the security of marriage or the comfort of wealth, but the experience of being truly known and loved for exactly who she was. His manipulation had brought them together, but his love had made their union worth having. And Harrison, watching Victoria bloom into confident happiness as the years passed, knew that every day of planning and every moment of uncertainty had been worthwhile to achieve the privilege of calling her his wife. Not because he had forced her to be, but because she had chosen to remain so.